So the inspiration for this is I wanted to play with some sort of like jazzy sounds, kind of get some hip hop feeling. I wanted to play with electric piano and get some nice like comping chords. And these are just things that I don't have the expertise in terms of playing a keyboard, in terms of being able to jump around on chords on a keyboard and do so in a musical way. I also was sort of disappointed in the electric piano sounds that we have in Bitwig, and similarly in Ableton Live, it's really a similar issue. But I really like the workflow of these, of Live and Bitwig. They're pretty similar. They're what I would call a modern workflow. We have the arrangement view here where we have our time going from left to right, but we also have this nice sort of what I call a spreadsheet view, where we have these little cells of sound that we can organize and just come up with little clips and little ideas, and then you can sort of play around with these ideas in a sort of like Lego-like fashion. And that's kind of contrary to like Logic and GarageBand, where they're sort of oriented just on that arrangement view, and the interfaces are a little bit less business-like. You can see this distortion plugin that I have on this track does not look like a distortion pedal that you buy at the guitar shop. It doesn't have the sort of like real life look to it, the skeuomorphic design. That's really kind of all business, and Ableton Live is a lot like this too. Things are very consistent, and when you work on a computer, it's nice to have that consistency so you can get things done quickly. The interface sort of melts away. Though if you're just getting up and started, it sure is nice to have this sort of inspiring look of feeling like you're playing a real piano or using a the actual control panel from a Rhodes. That's pretty nice. You can also get some really nice sounds out of GarageBand. So that's what the inspiration was for this. Trying to get these acoustic bass, electric piano, getting the competency of chords, having some drum loops that I like. Didn't go through a sound library to find them. So what I did is I have this GarageBand set up. So I just kind of added a vintage electric piano. This Wurlitzer has a really nice bite to it. Hopefully we can, I'm going to go ahead and sort of disable Bitwig maybe, if I can do that, because I'm sort of, well, we'll see what we can do here. So the first thing I did is I had this sort of idea of working with sort of jazz sounds, and the first thing I thought of was, well, let's look up some chord progressions, jazz chord progressions, just knowing jazz history. Gershwin, he provided a lot of modern jazz chord progressions, so I just looked up some Gershwin jazz chord progressions and found a nice one that I liked from I Got Rhythm, which is a classic and featured in a lot of jazz tunes. And that chord progression is C major, A minor, and I believe D minor. Then it goes to G and E. And what's really nice about the way this worked out for me was very nice because, again, I'm not very good at a keyboard. I don't really even need to change the shape of my fingers and go up on black and white keys, which is always very clumsy for me. As a guitarist, I'm used to just being able to keep the same shape and transpose. And so that works out nicely. So all I did was, instead of trying to play those chords, I just played them directly into GarageBand and recorded them 1 bar a piece. You can see my MIDI notes here. So I record those softer tones and then hit it harder. Because this has a nice bite to it, so I kind of wanted to get those different sounds out of it. And in order to bring those into something I could play with, what I wanted to do is sort of use sort of like a classic hip hop production techniques. Classic hip hop was, a lot of it was produced on the Akai MPC series of samplers, which included this very familiar 4x4 pad that we have on the music production overlay. So incorporating those chords into this, all I had to do was take my track here, mute. I have everything else muted, and then just go ahead and share from GarageBand and export song to disk. So I'll save it as a WAV file because I don't want it to be compressed. And for the sake of example, I'm just going to save this to the desktop, and I'll call this Electric Piano. And it's going to go ahead and bounce that to a WAV file. And then that's going to be on my desktop, electricpiano.wav. So people, don't do what I just did and just save all your files to desktop. It's totally messy. But I'm doing that for the sake of example. Do as I say, not as I do. So then what I did is I just dragged that into Bitwig, and this is a very similar thing in live. It's, you know, you have your cells of clips here. I can just drag that WAV file into an audio track, and we can see there it is. And it's already set up nicely with some onsets. You see these little blue things. What it does is it analyzes the file and looks for the starts of attacks of your different sounds and tries to sort of organize your file, and it does that to keep things in tempo as well as to make everything just sort of work together magically. And that's really the beauty of Live and Bitwig, is that they have this clip grid that no matter what you throw in there, it analyzes it, keeps it in sync. A lot of times, so I'll go and click on this clip here, and we get a bunch of info here. Similarly in Live, there's a panel like this. It's just a little bit smaller. We can take a look at the tempo that it detects, and it detected 100 BPM. Sometimes it's wrong, and you'll need to change that. So if it's wrong, let's say it comes in at 94, you can see that it doesn't follow the grid here, and things get kind of messed up. So it's good to know that I did it at 100 BPM in GarageBand when I bring it in to my 100 BPM template here. So what we do to create a drum rack, and again, similar in Live, I'll show you this more specifically later, what happens in Live with this. We want to slice it to Drum Machine, and Drum Machine is going to organize it in this grid. We could also slice to multi-sample, which would be something that would be more appropriate for a piano type interface. So we'll go ahead and slice to Drum Machine. Now there's a few options here, and this is sort of like the in-depth part of getting to know how to use the Bitwig in Live. In Bitwig's case, you have the option to bounce it before you slice it to a drum machine. This has different advantages, like if you stretch out the sound or modify it with the stretching, then you can actually just sort of bake that into the samples that you create for the drum rack. That's not what I want to do in this case. So there's different ways of slicing. You can slice at the bars, which is just along the time grid, or you can use the onsets, which is what those blue flags were. And you can see here that's going to create 9 slices. So let's go ahead and take a look at our onsets. So you can see that it did a pretty good job of finding those. And this is a nice way to do it because it's going to sort of make it easier to sort of cut up any file, and you don't have to worry so much about how it's organized. We did quantize it here in GarageBand, so we have all the chords are lined up nicely, so we can slice it on bars. But if you wanted to, you can go in and zoom in on this and adjust these onsets to your liking, and before you slice it. I believe we can create an onset with a pen here, maybe. There we go. And I'm learning on the fly here, and I want to create one here too. And so now everything is marked up nicely. If we slice on onsets, it's just going to take a razor blade to all those things and slice it up. Let's take a look at what happens. We are going to slice to drum machine, bounce and slice. I want to slice raw because I don't want to maintain any stretching or anything. I want the original fidelity. And then I'm going to slice at the onset. It's going to create 10 slices because we have 5 chords at 2 different velocities. So I'm going to select that track and double click on it to, I can take a look at this MIDI file that it automatically created, which just steps through all the sounds. Take a look at the drum machine and it puts a sample. So now I don't have to have all the clumsiness of the piano. As a non-keyboard player, I can just jam out. And I can hear what it sounds like to have this really simple chord progression. What happens when I mix a C and a, well, perhaps G chord? If I had perfect pitch, I could tell you. So you can see how these chords work together. Those work nicely. Those are more dissonant. So you can use those to add different flavors to your track. The other thing to notice about this is it doesn't really sound like someone's playing an electric piano anymore. It sounds like I'm playing samples, which I like. It gives it a nice electronic feel. All the articulations are always the same, but we did impose it because, you know, I actually did play them in here. You can see that the velocities are a little bit different for each note. That's going to give the chord a little bit different flavor. So what I did is I can go ahead and turn on my metronome, and I can just record a track here. Maybe I'll solo this. Stop it, delete it, and I'm just going to record a clip. That's my original lick. So then we can stop that and we can organize this clip. You know, it's just a bunch of single MIDI notes. It's not complicated. We can go ahead and trim it if we wanted to and just take out the part we wanted. Nice thing about Bitwig is you get this nice setup here where you have the clips and your arrangement. You can just drag your clips in here as you like. And I could drag this into my existing track. And I just kind of want that second part that I did. And we can go ahead and play that. And we can add everything else and take off the solo. So you can see I'm already starting to build up the track with some interesting sonorities. And kind of have like this, you know, jazz hip hop feel to it because we're using the hip hop production styles, we're using some jazz sounds, but we're not sampling from a record. We're not going to have any problems like getting clearance or doing anything illegal. And we also impose it with our own sort of creative voice rather than having to use somebody else's. So that's the piano, and that was a way of being able to have chords at hand and sort of generate a melody on the fly that I liked. I did similar things with the bass. The bass, I just recorded a simple bass line, not even really a bass line, just grabbing notes. So in GarageBand, I'm starting to think of things as modules rather than a timeline start, beginning, and end. It's more of a, you know, rather than having to worry about the composition at the start, we can start thinking about things modularly. Oh, wow, you weren't happy about that. And I'm going to go down to the bass register here. And again, I know those C, A. I like that, the pitch bend. You can turn that off if you want to have a little bit cleaner sample, or you can bake that bend in. But again, it's just C, A, D, E, G, E. And again, I can take that, export it with my share menu, export song to disk. And again, do what people should not do and save things to the desktop. And I'm just going to call this the bass. All right, cool. And that was easy. There's my bass line. And I'm just sort of using this audio track as sort of a bin where I can add these pieces. And again, slice to drum machine. And let's take a look at that again and see what it did for its onsets. Its onsets, it didn't really create many onsets in this analysis. Ah, there we go. Zoom in and then I see them. Created a few more than I want, actually. And the other thing, this one is again already sort of quantized to the grid. Oops, double click on that. We can ensure that it's time quantized to the 16th note. Maybe I'll double check that. I'm going to go ahead and export it again because it wasn't quite quantized. And I can show you how to slice just along the time grid instead of the audio onsets. Share, export song to disk. And that is bass, quantized, quantize. I only speak in typo. There we go. So there's our bass quantized. This is going to be really easy to slice to drum machine and slice raw at the bars. And it's going to create a bunch of extra samples because I have a bunch of space here at the end. Let's take a look at this. Double click on the track and we can see here, well, that didn't work out as nicely as I'd hoped, and I think I know why. So the issue here is the issue that I'm glad this happened, because this is what I warned you about. The tempo down here, it thinks it's 146 BPM, which it is not. We know it's 100 BPM. So by fixing that, it's actually going to align everything to the grid. Go ahead and delete that. The other thing I'm going to do is slice off some of this excess so we don't have so many blank samples just chewing up hard drive space. And I will slice to drum machine, slice raw with bars, okay. And now, get back to my grid that I like so much. And my audio is dying here because we're streaming several video cameras at once. And we're also mixing with that. I'm going to turn that up a bit. Okay, here's another good lesson. When you're working in Bitwig and you hear that, I don't know if you can hear it on your end because of compression and everything, but I'm getting this kind of nasty little click at the start on most of these samples. And what I'm going to do is go to our little expanded view here and zoom in. Look at that. So we can see how this sample is a little bit off. So we can go ahead and fix these things just by dragging these yellow in and out points. And this creates a window that is going to determine what our sample is. And you can see how this kind of missed that first part there. We're going to get that right there, clean it up, and this is what I call secretarial work of sampling. and audio production. You just have to, a lot of times, make these adjustments even though the computer does a lot of the hard work for you. And now we're going to have a nice instrument that we've created sort of on our own with the help of the kind people at Apple who have done a lot of hard work for us and made these royalty-free instruments for us. And finally, our last piece here. All right. So now I can work on a nice bass accompaniment, and that's how I built up the bass line that I have in here. And everything works because I sort of baked in the melody by sort of arranging everything in GarageBand and just exporting things as audio. Obviously, it's not as flexible as if we have control over individual pieces of the instrument, but you know what? There's a lot of great music that we can make that doesn't rely on that detail. So this is a great way to get started with banging things out quickly. And again, like, I don't need to be intimate with a keyboard and know how to change keys and make sure that I'm in the right note and everything. Everything's in serial. Everything's serial here. And that sounds familiar. Anybody watch McDonald's ads? Funny. McDonald's used Gershwin. Let's see. Now that's sort of, I think you get the idea now of how I just like sort of go ahead and create these instruments out of the building blocks, using the instruments in GarageBand as building blocks. The other thing I did was not to just make these individual hits. I also did some creating of loops here. So again, I can use this. This is a nice, I could use that to play drums. I'm going to go ahead and play this drum kit here. I got to turn this up. And I am going to go back to Bitwig and turn its audio, turn its master down. And let's see, GarageBand, we should be getting something. So this was a kit that I just knew that I liked. It has a good, just from working in GarageBand, I, sort of have my things that I like out of it. And this was just like, oh, I found this. This is great. It's got a great old school sound to it. But again, this kit isn't immediately available in the software that I prefer. So instead of just sort of ripping it to individual hits like this, which I did as well, and I'll show you that, I just went ahead and made some loops. Let's see, I don't think that's the right one. It doesn't sound very good because our software is choking here. That's very sad. Let's see if we can get something good out of it. So I'm going to go ahead and turn the metronome on. And I'm going to go ahead, just for inspiration, turn on my chords up here and turn on looping. Not happy with that. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and record something and see what happens. That's not going to be good, but that's just like a cooking show. That's why I sort of pre-built everything so I can just pull things out of the oven. That has kind of a nice broken beat feel to it, though, I have to say. So again, we can set our loop to this section. We can, actually, I think if I just export this track, keep everything muted except that one, and again, share, export song to disk, and it's going to mute everything except that. Call this drum loops. Yeah, so it's going to export all those things that I lined up here in these little 4-bar segments. And I used this loop selector here to just create little regions that I could play around in, and not have to, you know, again, this is sort of using that cut and paste, build ideas, instead of trying to compose the whole thing from start to finish. And so let's take a look at how we can build out these drum loops. Go ahead and add the drum loops, and again I'm going to double check that the tempo is right, which it is not. So I'll go ahead and make that 100 BPM. Take a look at that. You see all those onsets. We're not going to want to slice this by onsets because we're not trying to get all the individual hits of it, though that is a really interesting way to break up drum loops. If you're working with a sample library, you can actually turn it into, like, you know, playable pieces on a drum kit. Go ahead and change over to the MPC. And I'm going to, let's see, slice to drum machine. This is going to be a little bit weird, so I'm going to slice at bars again. And it's going to create 17 slices. Well, you know what? I'm actually not going to do that. What I'm going to do is, because that's just going to be cumbersome, I'm going to just take this thing and make 4-bar chunks out of it, and just arrange the in and out points for these things, which is simple enough. And this is a nice way to, instead of having to, like, you know, slice a bunch of individual pieces, just take one long file and duplicate it. I'm just using Option and drag into a cell. And again, this works in Bitwig as well as live. And now I just have some nice little, I gotta turn up my master here. That was my clumsy attempt. Here we go. This is a little bit nicer. So that is, you know, just being able to generate loops. It's fairly obvious if you've worked with this stuff. If you've never worked with these things before, those are sort of the basic mechanics of it, being able to drag it into an audio track, into a cell, and then just duplicate it and just move your window around. Since everything's quantized, everything goes very quickly, and you can build up a nice little set of loops. And that's what I did here. You can see that in this is just a couple different loops that I generated from that same GarageBand session that is quickly becoming messy. And so that is the drum loops. The drum machine, I also did build out the drum machine for just this kit. I gotta turn that solo off and arm my drum machine. Ah, it's off by 1. Oops, okay. So now I basically recreated that kit. Again, it doesn't have the sort of the subtleties of this actual kit that they built in GarageBand, but it's in a format that I much vastly prefer, and that is in the environment of Bitwig. So what I did here is very simple. You know, I just set up a MIDI track that has all the individual pieces in it, and just played each note. I mean, this is very obvious, I am sure. And let's see, do I have that track in here? Yeah, I've got drum hits here. So this was the original track I did. Oops. And solo. And again, I just used the audio onsets. So when you double click on a clip in here, you can see that there's the different little controls. So you can actually add some individual pan to clips, which is pretty cool. So you can change the the pitch and the filtering and things like that without bringing it into a sampler. And the onsets here are all kind of nicely set up. And so I just sliced a drum machine, and then that created this nice recreation of the kit that I had in GarageBand, brought it into the environment I wanted. And you know, so it's quick and dirty, but it works. So now I'm ready to go. And let's see, the other thing I wanted to show you, we're coming up on our hour. I wanted to show you some of these same things in live. So I'm going to go ahead and quit Bitwig. And the GarageBand stuff we've covered already. Really, it's just a matter of just a review. I just found different instruments. You know, I could add a track, create a software instrument, and you know, in this case it's a piano, and I can go ahead and just play some piano. So this is actually a very nice sounding piano. If you buy a Morph, you get Arturia Analog Lab Lite for free, which has actually a lot of nice pianos. So you're not actually really starved for pianos if you have a Morph. But if you don't have a Morph and you need a decent piano sound, which frankly Live and Bitwig don't have out of the box, though they're available elsewhere, this is a nice way of kind of like creating a quick piano plugin for yourself. Again, you can just sort of, you know, I just need an octave, and you can record it. Let's see, I'm gonna go ahead and kill this. And then we could render that to, again, render it to an audio file, bring it into our environment, and do as we did before, slice it up and create, you know, a drum machine, or you can create a multi-sample from it. So let's go ahead and take a look at live, and I'm going to sort of quickly review how we do some of these same things, and we're not going to be able to save it because we only have the trial on this machine. Let's see, so we will take the same samples that we used here. I'm going to just go ahead and save export disabled. So we've already, it comes up, you open up live, this is for the first time you've ever seen it, you get 2 MIDI tracks and 2 audio tracks. The MIDI tracks you can fill up with instruments from our picker over here. So if you wanted to, you could start, you know, add a synthesizer and go ahead and change the audio output device to my balance. And we're immediately up and running. The audio, but what we were interested in is the audio section here. So we will create our own MIDI instruments out of that. Here is the e-piano chords, and so that's electric piano chords. Bring that into an audio clip. Live is going to analyze it. We can take a look at it. We're going to change, we've already got our, oops, that should be 100. So we take a look at our e-piano chords. It detected the BPM more or less correctly, and if we want to, we can add onsets if we wanted to, just by clicking on these, the timeline, double-clicking on the timeline here. These are little warp markers. I'm not going to get into exactly what warp markers are, but they're similar to those transients that we saw in Bitwig. And I can, again, just right-click on the clip itself, and there's actually a few different things we can do to it. Slice to a MIDI track, convert harmony, which is pretty cool. You can actually turn the audio into MIDI and then apply it to a synthesizer. Let's go ahead and see what happens when we do that. It should be kind of fun. So this is a nice way of taking a melody that you like and just applying it to. So you can hear that electric piano that they provided us in live. Not as sweet. But that's kind of a cool thing to do, is that now you can just take that, actually convert audio. That's pretty dramatic. So you can take a melody or chord progression and turn it into use sounds that you like instead of the originals. And so I'm going to slice this to a new MIDI track. Create one slice per bar. Again, we have those same options that we saw in Bitwig. And say OK. And I actually really didn't want to create. There was an option there. Let me go ahead and slice to new MIDI track. There was an option to preserve warp timing. I don't really want to do that. And I can, again, that was the same thing. It just creates a drum. In Live's terms, it's a drum rack. In Bitwig, they call it a drum machine. You hear the pitch bend. I can turn that off. All right, I'm already making EDM. I can't help myself. So there's some nice things that it does here is that, let's see, the attack. I can actually start modifying things. And I've taken it into sort of like a, sort of ethereal thing instead of like the sweet electric piano thing that we had before. And, you can actually, do some cool looping. In this case, have the loop off. And let's see, where are my loop markers? Oh, that's all set up here. There we go. And I can modify that here if I want to. Perhaps? No. All right, I'll have to set that up some other time. So that's kind of like, now it's sort of a dreamy sound almost. Ambient explorations are all ours. So yeah, there's a lot of modifications you can do once you start bringing these things in. And so that's how you slice things to a drum machine in Live. And then the other thing I kind of covered was just being able to take a longer chunk of drum loops. So I'll go ahead and bring that into here, and we can take a look at just duplicating those and see how similar it is to set the in and out points. Again, I can very quickly make a 4-bar chunk here. And since I have that window already created, it makes it very easy to just grab that window and drag it over to the next section. And things are kind of messed up again because computers get too smart on us and they try to interpret things. So we'll tell it that it's actually 100 BPM. So that is how those things work in Live. And I think we're pretty much coming up on our hour here. Though I did cheat, we lost some time there to the to our technical difficulties, and there was some other stuff I kind of wanted to show off in Bitwig that kind of, again, I had this initial idea of, sort of doing that old school sort of, 90s jazz hip hop type of thing. That's not really what I came up with. It was more sort of like library version of that. But I did start playing around with those very sounds that I brought in from GarageBand and ended up with something quite radically different. And once my software starts up here, I will go ahead and try to show you how I did some of those things. So I'm going to go ahead and open that resample tutorial again. I don't have the track that I ended up getting highly distracted on, but I can show you some of the things I did. So now that we have this, take that still off. Now that we have this set up in a nice drum machine, we can start adding some clever tricks and effects. So this is all just MIDI data. Whoa, we got an arpeggiator here. So let's see what we can do with the arpeggiator. And so now it has nothing to do with an electric piano except the basic, the basic sort of timbre of it. And even that is extremely shaved off. So it's just repeating, and that's kind of fun. We can actually, here's the thing I love about Bitwig. Clicking on this little arrow here shows the modulators. And we can bring in some modulators, which are just going to change things over time. And my favorite one is the classic LFO. And click on that, and we have all these great things we can do. We can sync it to a time. Let's see, so I can sync it to, let's say, half a bar. So now that's going at 2 beats at 100 BPM. Now I click on this arrow and I can apply it to the velocity. Let's see what happens. And now you can see things are starting to vibrate. What does this mean? That means there's life. And now we're done applying those. Excuse me. So now we've got this sort of like varying, this oscillating sound of from the velocity, because we're just sort of like following that sine wave of how much it's of how loud it's playing it, because it's changing the velocity even though I'm just holding down a button. So it's getting a little bit of a trance-like state. We can also add some effects. I've already got some on here which are kind of, and I don't know if you're going to hear this in the sort of ultra compression of the live stream, but it's got a real sort of flanging sound. I'll turn this up a little bit. And I've got a filter that's just kind of making it sort of talk a little bit at us. And made it nice and wide. Add a little distortion. Make that reverb a little bit bigger. And then I also have some send effects. And now we can listen to my original track, and now it's taking on a very different character. I hear that. The single hits of the drum machine. And you know, we can also do, this is kind of fun. I'll keep that, add another modulator. Classic LFO. And I can apply these to the gates, and I'm not going to time sync this one. Let's see. That's what I want to do. I want to turn these gates off, so then it'll just turn things on and off sort of somewhat randomly. And so now we can impose this rhythm. And again, this is just, you know, sort of letting math do the work for us instead of trying to play all these individual pieces. So as you can see, like with an environment, this is what I mean by a modern environment as opposed to the sort of traditional environment that GarageBand gives you, where it's very much you set up an instrument, you play it, you record it, and then maybe add a little bit of effects to it. Whereas with something like Bitwig, you can actually set something up, play it, and then just let it play, and then just start running operations on it and start essentially programming. It's analog programming in the digital format. So there's actually a lot of things to explore in this. Yeah, so that's, hopefully this was useful for you. It was definitely sort of not an advanced tutorial by any stretch of the imagination. I just kind of wanted to get people comfortable with the idea of moving from one DAW to another, and for people who were curious about, you know, things like Bitwig and Live, how they can start to explore those in a very simple way without becoming overwhelmed by all of the options. And you know, you can also use some of the things that you're already familiar with just by bouncing things to audio, slicing them to drum tracks, and then creating these little sonic playgrounds for yourself that really can quite radically change how you make music, and as well as, you know, being able to do things a little bit more efficiently too, because everything's really consistent in these interfaces. You can actually really get work done quickly. And because you're working modularly, you can share things among different projects very easily. So this is, I just want to wrap it up, and I hope you have found it useful. If there are any questions out there, you can always reach me at peter@sensel.com. And I hope you've enjoyed this. Have a good weekend, evening, morning, afternoon, wherever you are. All right, take care.